Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The air at Forrester Creations' sleek, sunlit offices was usually tense, with a mix of inventiveness and family strife that had defined the company for decades. Ridge Forrester paced the executive suite like a caged animal, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored jacket, fingers raking through his dark hair as he gazed out at the Los Angeles skyline. The company his father had started from scratch was thriving under his leadership, or so he told himself. But lately, every move felt like a tightrope walk over a pit of ancient grudges and new betrayals. Eric Forrester, the man who had started it all, was softly but forcibly driven into retirement. It had not been easy. Ridge vividly remembered the day, the surprise party to commemorate his lengthy career, the speeches, and the forced grins. Eric had played along at first, but the hurt in his eyes was clear. Ridge had convinced himself that it was for the best. Eric's health had been weakened by everything he'd been through, including strokes and tiredness from constant collections. Steffi had agreed, Carter had nodded, and Brooke, with her delicate heart, had gone silent when Ridge said they needed more vitality at the top. But Eric hadn't slipped quietly into the background. He stayed around the estate, sketching in his study, and offered unwanted advice, which Ridge dismissed more harshly than intended. Ridge would say, "Dad, you're supposed to be relaxing," hoping to sound kind, but it came across as patronizing. Eric would give that knowing smile, as if he could see right through his kid, and then walk away, without saying anything. Then came the shift. Katie Logan Spencer had had enough of Forrester's letdowns. She'd spent her energy into public relations only to have an outside firm step in during a crisis. The snub had stung, especially since Brooke, her own sister, had not battled more for her. Katie had walked away, head high, and Bill had given her the keys to a new fashion firm as a wedding gift, a daring gesture that made headlines across the industry. Logan. The name had weight, as it was associated with the Logan women who had always orbited the Forrester world like satellites, sometimes allies, sometimes adversaries. Katie had not wasted time. She hired talent and created a vision that focused on what Forrester excelled at: high fashion with compassion. Whispers spread very instantly. Designers yearning for a fresh start, models drawn to a new label. Then came the surprise announcement that no one at Forrester expected. Ridge learned about it in the worst possible way, during a casual talk in the showroom. Brooke was scrolling through sketches, her blonde hair catching the sun, when Carter dropped the bombshell. "Eric's been seen at Katie's office. Multiple times. Word is he's consulting or more." Ridge didn't move. "What do you mean, more?" Brooke's gaze widened. He wouldn't. Not after everything. However, he had. Eric, the founder and legend, had entered Katie's sleek new headquarters and offered his help. Not as a figurehead, but as an active designer. Katie, always courteous, hesitated at first. "I don't want to come between you and your family," she informed him. Eric shook his head. "This is what I want. I've got designs burning a hole in my portfolio, and Ridge made it clear that he doesn't need them here." The statement came as a shock to Forrester. Ridge stormed into Eric's home that evening, banging the door harder than required. Eric sat in his study, surrounded by fabric swatches and half-finished gowns, looking better than he has in months. "Dad," Ridge began, his voice low and menacing. "Tell me it's not true. Tell me you're not going to work for Katie." Eric looked up calmly, setting down his pencil. "It's true, Ridge. I'm coming out of retirement. And yes, I'm working with Katie at Logan." Ridge's face darkened, his jaw clenched. "You can't work for Katie. You built this company, Forrester Creations, with your own hands. And now you're handing your talent to the competition? To a Logan?" Eric stood slowly, his posture straight despite the years. "Competition? Ridge, you forced me out. You threw a party to celebrate my retirement, like I was some old horse ready for the pasture. I wasn't ready. I still have ideas, collections, passion. Katie saw that. She offered me a place where I could create without being sidelined." Ridge chuckled bitterly, the sound echoing off the walls. "Sidelined? We did it for your health. You nearly died pushing yourself too hard. I wasn't going to watch that happen again. You didn't give me a choice, Eric yelled back, his voice rising for the first time. You decided for me. You and Steffi, Brooke, Carter, you all sat there and planned my exit without asking if I wanted it. I founded this company with your mother. I poured my life into it. And when I needed to stay, you pushed me aside. Ridge came closer, his eyes burning. Because you're my father. I love you. I couldn't lose you to stress or another collapse. But this? Going to Katie? That's betrayal, Dad. Pure and simple. You're taking everything you taught me, everything we built, and giving it to Bill Spencer's wife. The woman who's been gunning for us since she walked out. Eric's look softened slightly, but his determination remained. Katie isn't the enemy. She's family in a way. She's married to Bill, yes, but she's also Brooke's sister. And she's offering me respect. A chance to design again, to see my work on the runway without politics or pity. Ridge nodded. He was now pacing. Respect? She's using you. To stick it to us. To prove she can build something bigger. And you're letting her. After everything, the Logans always circling, always wanting a piece of Forrester. Brooke fought for her place here. But Katie? She never fully committed until now. That's not fair, Eric said with a laugh. Katie was loyal until she wasn't treated that way. And Brooke, she's torn. I see it in her eyes. She doesn't want this war any more than I do. But you and Steffi keep pushing, keep drawing lines. Us versus them. When did the Logans become the enemy again? Ridge made a sudden stop. When they started their own house. When Katie trademarked Logan and acted like she owned the name. When Bill started pumping money into it to undercut us. This isn't just business, Dad. It's personal. You're choosing them over your own blood. Eric took a deep breath and wiped his temples. I'm choosing myself, Ridge. For once. I've spent decades putting Forrester first, putting you first. I stepped back when you asked, even when it killed me inside. Now I want to create. Katie's giving me that platform. If that makes me the villain in your eyes, so be it. The silence lasted for a long time. Ridge recalled all the times Eric had pulled him out, forgiven his sins, and welcomed him back after each Brooke Taylor flip. And now this. His father is aligning with the one family that has always been the shade to Forrester's light. You know what this means, Ridge eventually remarked, his voice husky. Steffi won't stand for it. Brooke will be heartbroken. The press will eat it up. Eric Forrester defects to rival label. It'll look like we're falling apart. Eric's stare remained fixed. Then maybe it's time we stop pretending everything's perfect. Maybe this rivalry pushes us all to be better. Or maybe it tears everything down. But I won't sit idle anymore. I can't. Ridge's hands were clasped together. You can't work for Katie, he said again, although the words lacked the fervor they had before. They were nearly pleading now. Eric moved nearer, putting his hand on his son's shoulder. I already am, son, and I'm not sorry. Ridge backed away, the rejection hurting more than any argument ever could. He departed without saying anything else, the door quietly closing behind him, a gentle sound that rang louder than any slam. Brooke waited at Forrester with a worried expression on her face. When Ridge told her, she collapsed into a chair and covered her mouth. Eric with Katie? How could he? He feels betrayed, Ridge said. By me. By us. Brooke's eyes welled with tears. He's my sister's ally now. My own sister. This is going to destroy everything. Ridge drew her closer, but even in her embrace, uncertainty crept in. Had they pushed too far? Had driving Eric out resulted in the very fracture they feared? Meanwhile, across town, Katie stood in her new office, watching Eric sketch on a drafting table. The lines flowed naturally and inspired. You're sure about this? She inquired softly. Eric grinned genuinely and brightly. More confident than I've been in a long time. Katie nodded, a mixture of exhilaration and worry in her chest. It wasn't simply business. That was a statement. Logan would advance, propelled by Eric's talent. And Forrester would have to face the consequences of their decisions. The fashion world held its breath. two residences, one family legacy divided. Ridge's rage turned into determination. He would battle for what was his. But deep down, a small voice wondered if the true treachery had begun long before Eric strolled through Katie's door. Days evolved into weeks, sketches became collections, and the rivalry erupted. Runway previews leaked, headlines screamed, Eric's defection, and old ties frayed under the strain. Steffi erupted in board meetings, vowing to destroy the fledgling label. Carter rushed to preserve trademarks and secrets. Brooke mediated, split between sister and husband. As Bill quietly gloated, his present to Katie transformed into a weapon. Eric prospered, his health remained stable, and his creativity blossomed. Katie's vision was enhanced by his guidance, elegant, bold, and unapologetic. Models flocked, investors gathered, and the first Logan show loomed like a storm on the horizon. Ridge watched from a distance, his rage giving way to something colder. Determination. He refused to let his father's betrayal dictate Forrester's fate. If anything, it would spark a stronger comeback than before. But at quiet moments, alone in the office his father had once commanded, Ridge looked at old images of Eric and Stephanie, both young and ambitious, and wondered if forgiveness could ever cross the divide again. The battle lines were drawn not just with cloth and seams, but also with blood and loyalty. In Los Angeles, where glamour obscured true emotion, no one escaped untouched. Ridge never expected the reality to hit him so hard. He arrived into the Forrester offices already frustrated, juggling deadlines, design disagreements, and the constant strain that comes with working with family. But nothing prepared him for the news that his own father, Eric, had crossed a line Ridge deemed intolerable. The moment Eric's words left his mouth, the air between them became thick with disappointment and hatred. Ridge stood transfixed at first, looking at Eric as if he were a stranger. The office, which had previously represented legacy and pride, now seemed suffocating. Eric attempted to explain himself, his voice calm and almost practiced, but Ridge was not prepared to hear excuses. All he could think of was Katie, her integrity, her loyalty, and how she'd been drawn into yet another Forrester storm without her knowledge. So you made this decision on your own. Ridge eventually broke, his voice sharp enough to break Eric's composure. You didn't think to speak to me? Or to her? Eric sighed and leaned hard on his desk. He argued that he was doing what was best for the company and the family. He spoke on experience, instinct, and knowing when to make difficult judgments. But Ridge wasn't buying it. To him, this was not about corporate strategy. It was about respect, or the lack thereof. You can't work for Katie, Ridge murmured, his words spilling out before he could control them. The statement resonated throughout the room, louder than he intended, propelled by years of unresolved bitterness. He was unhappy not only about the decision but also about the pattern. Eric had always assumed that his position as founder gave him the authority to overrule everyone else, particularly when emotions and familial ties were involved. Ridge's tone irritated Eric. He reminded his son that Forrester Creations exists because of him, and Ridge's success was built on the foundation Eric set decades before. Ridge, however, said that legacy did not give anyone permission to alter people's lives. Katie wasn't a pawn, and Eric couldn't push her into an impossible situation without consequences. As the dispute progressed, old wounds arose. Ridge mentioned other decisions in which Eric had chosen control over collaboration, tradition over advancement. Eric, in turn, accused Ridge of allowing personal feelings to impair his judgment. The office became a battleground where generations clashed, each confident they were correct and neither ready to back down. Meanwhile, Katie had no idea that her name was being used as a weapon in a conflict she had never committed to wage. When she discovered what Eric had done, the treachery struck deep. She had always attempted to negotiate the Forrester family with caution, knowing that any blunder could have long-term consequences. Being in the midst of a power battle made her feel vulnerable and exploited. When Ridge faced her later, his rage had subsided into exasperation mingled with concern. He made it plain that his fury was not meant toward her. If anything, it was encouraged by the belief that she deserved more. Katie listened quietly, divided between gratitude for Ridge's help and embarrassment at being the source of such strife. Eric, on the other hand, was unwilling to admit his mistakes. He believed Katie was capable of handling the pressure and that the arrangement would eventually benefit everyone involved. Ridge's reaction seemed exaggerated to him, indicating that his son had yet to learn to separate business from emotion. But Ridge saw it differently. He witnessed a parent who refused to change, who believed he knew what was best for everyone else. The discovery upset him more than he wanted to admit. This wasn't just one decision. It was a lifetime of being overshadowed, struggling for autonomy in a corporation that claimed his family name but never felt like his. The stress spread beyond the office walls. Whispers swirled around Forrester Creations as employees sensed something was odd. Loyalties were questioned, and alliances altered quietly. No one stated it aloud, but everyone felt the quake generated by Ridge and Eric's confrontation. Katie tried to remain professional, but the tension was evident. She wondered if staying involved was worth the emotional cost. Every interaction seemed tense, every conversation tainted by the understanding that her presence represented a larger conflict. Ridge, resolved not to let history repeat itself, started advocating for change. He desired clearer boundaries, greater openness, and a future in which decisions were not influenced by a single person's ego. But challenging Eric meant risking a fracture that may never fully heal. Eric sat alone in his office later that night, staring at the old sketches and photographs on the walls. For the first time, doubt set in. He wondered if his once reliable instincts were now blinding him. However, pride prevented him from reaching out and conceding that perhaps, just maybe, Ridge was correct. The family was at a crossroads. What began as a single decision involving Katie revealed years of repressed tension. It was unclear whether this would result in permanent division or expansion. But one thing was certain. The era of unquestionable control at Forrester Creations was coming to an end, and nothing would ever be the same again. Ridge could not sleep that night. The disagreement with Eric played out constantly in his memory, each sharp syllable resonating louder in the solitude of his home. Anger remained, but underlying it lurked something heavier: disappointment. He had spent his entire life attempting to gain his father's trust, demonstrating that he was capable of leading without making the same mistakes. Nonetheless, Eric's decision demonstrated how difficult it was to break old patterns. Ridge returned to Forrester Creations the next morning, full of resolution. He realized that ignoring Eric would only worsen the rift. He didn't expect to find Katie already there, peering out the design office window with a distant face. When she turned to face him, her eyes were filled with quiet strength and tiredness. "I never asked for this," Katie whispered gently, breaking the silence before Ridge could respond. "I just wanted to do my job without getting involved in another family war." Ridge nodded, remorse pouring over him. He promised her that she would never be forced into something she didn't want, not by Eric or anyone else. He swore to resolve the matter, even if it meant confronting his father again. Katie appreciated his remarks, but she also realized how complicated the Forrester dynamic was. Promises in this family were sometimes more difficult to keep than to make. When Eric eventually emerged from his office, the atmosphere changed immediately. Ridge returned his father's look, the tension between them unmistakable. This time, the debate was calmer, more controlled. Ridge spoke aggressively, explaining why the action was wrong and how it destroyed trust within the company. Eric listened, his countenance unreadable, but the impact of Ridge's words began to sink in. For the first time, Eric did not interrupt. When he eventually spoke, his voice was lower, almost regretful. He conceded that he may have acted too swiftly and autonomously. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was a break in Ridge's armor that he had been battling against for years. However, nothing was resolved. The harm had been done, and re-establishing trust would take time. Ridge walked away knowing that the battle was more than just Katie or a single decision. It was about redefining Forrester Creations' future. Change was on its way, whether Eric was prepared or not, and the next step would define not just the fate of the company, but also that of the family.